Well, welcome to the Holistic Health Series on Fridays, Optimizing Health and Well-Being. I'm your host, Eric Pepper, faculty at the Institute for Holistic Health Studies at San Francisco State, which is part of the Department of Recreation, Parks and Tourism and Holistic Health. And as many of you know, our courses fulfill both the upper division general education requirements, and we also offer a minor and certificate program in holistic health. I'm so excited about that we have restarted this series of holistic health, optimizing health and well-being, which will be offered every first and third Friday of the month for the spring semester. Now at this time, as the immediate threat of COVID appears to be receding, as more and more people are being vaccinated, or possibly because it's spring and summer and COVID seems to be more likely occurring in the winter time, this series is even more important, since the coronavirus most likely will continue to mutate, create new variants for which possibly the vaccine may be less effective. And also, we need to get ready for the next COVID XX, which is just waiting around the corner. As I said just before, most likely COVID-19 will become a seasonal disease like the flu. And we will continually be challenged how to reduce the virus or bacterial load, in this case virus exposure, but more importantly, how to enhance our immune system. If our immune system is competent, it would more likely be able to cope with future variants. And as many of you know, at present, 94% of people who die of COVID have immune senescence and/or comorbidities such as obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, etc. The Holistic Health Series aims to share holistic perspectives to optimize health and well-being and offer concepts and practices to optimize our immune system and our well-being. So they'll range from specifically focusing on the immune system this time, or on how we can do social connections or other things, develop self-awareness, etc. The speaker series is offered the first and third Friday of the month with different presenters. Today, I'm truly honored to introduce our speaker, Robert Gorter. I have known Robert Gorter since 1984 when he was a clinical faculty at UCSF. There he was a physician and researcher on AIDS at the San Francisco General Hospital. He also was the medical director of the Department of AIDS Epidemiology and Biostatistics at UCSF. He now lives in Cologne, Germany. So for him, it's evening time, as all of you can realize. He's so generously willing to come and speak. He lives, as I said, he lives in Cologne, Germany, where he founded the Medical Center of Cologne, which is dedicated to the treatment of cancer using dendritic cell vaccinations and adult mesenchymal stem cells in combination with immune supportive therapies and hyperthermia. What makes Robert's work so inspirational is that it's really based upon his own experience as an end-stage cancer patient. In 1975, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and then decided to refrain from the standard chemotherapy, which at that time probably would not have healed him, but would have had possibly extend his life a little bit with massive side effects. Instead, he implemented and explored non-toxic immune therapies. Thus, he became the first cancer patient to be treated successfully by himself in this way. The concept of this approach, and obviously much modified since that time, is described in our collaborative book, Fighting Cancer, a non-toxic approach to treatment, which we co-authored. Okay. As many of you may know, he's an international educator and clinician on anthroposophical medicine and really explores factors by which we can optimize our immune system. And because of his unique experience, he has been invited and has taught numerous times at San Francisco State as a lecturer in our course, which he developed, called Holistic Health 650, Anthroposophical Healing Studies. Now, without much ado, I really would like to introduce Robert Gorter. Robert, such a pleasure and welcome.
Well, thank you, Eric. And of course, it's my pleasure too to and see you again, but also to continue our discussions and also with students on, what we can do. Because the issue is also when you go to medical school, at medical school, they teach you 8 years long everything about disease, but very little about health. Yeah, and of course, so doctors know a lot, hopefully, about disease, but very little about health and also prevention. Because you don't do, also a good doctor should also pay attention to prevention. And now this thing is, so if I would put it in a nutshell, we will start from here, is that everything depends on your immune system, how your immune system functions. And and there are different components we now know, and many studies have been done, and also controls, clinical trials and epidemiological trials on how you can improve, or how you can diminish your immune function. So therefore, I want to have in my contribution, and Eric will also interrupt at times and also ask questions or add something. But you could say, so here in this first slide, so what determines health and disease? And of course here. And now what is important also, often people forget. I will have also been a school doctor at several Waldorf schools, especially also in Amsterdam, long before you guys were born. And part of the Waldorf school education, Rudolf Steiner schools, is that you have also a lot of pay attention to early childhood environment, and also probably we get to that also a couple of times, to have a fever, and also how to live and train your immune system also by living in a dirty environment, so to speak, and not highly sterile with only genocidal or the bactericidal soaps and so on. So, and then nutrition is an important component. We all know nutrition, that also determines you, and that is all part of any mental functioning, or whether you're quickly depressed or not. That's all part also of a lifestyle, and that's what we will discuss. There are various lifestyles, and how you can also, by changing or improving your lifestyle, that you can therefore also improve immune function and therefore your health. Because you can really say, where you have a good immune function, that's essentially the key to good health, and also good health, well-being, and also longevity. So, and one of the things also which has big influence on us, what we don't always consider, that is the medications you get prescribed by a doctor for sleeping tablets, many pain or antidepressants or pain medications. They suppress your immune function. Never one time, if I take one day some morphine, it will not harm me. But if you are taking it regularly or so, then it for sure will also suppress and harm your immune system.
Let me just add a note, Robert. Let me add a note, because it's sort of relevant to COVID, I think. As people get vaccinated, then some people will respond to the vaccination by getting, like, either kind of little inflammation or flu-like symptoms. But the key is, at that moment, unless it's truly a massive reaction, but if it's sort of moderate, mild, then right through that kind of momentary flu-like symptom, because if you suppress it with Tylenol, then you're also suppressing your immune system. And from other studies, not with COVID, because that data isn't around yet, it's clearly shown that then the immune response will be significantly lessened. And so therefore, when you do get the vaccination, right through it, unless obviously you have a very serious response.
Yeah, and that's also in general. So when you get the flu, there's a regular influenza, and every winter we have flu season, And then most of us will just have 1 or 2 days we're tired or sore throat or this or that. And then, but then you should just take a few days, take it easy. Maybe also for 2 or 3 days, take a sick leave, but do not suppress fever, because that we'll also discuss. Fever is a natural response by your organism to overcome and trauma, but also then infections, whether it's bacterial or viral infections. But the flu, these flu epidemics, which sort of visit us every year, mainly in the winter, they are the viral infections, and they cause easily a couple of days of virus, and it's better if it's not extreme to be maybe a little bit uncomfortable. And then we'll show that later data that those people who get cancer can hardly remember they ever had the flu or had the fever the last 30 years before. So also you must also see the positive side of flu epidemics. If you get a couple of days sore throat or the fever or muscle aches, that's sort of like aerobics for your immune system. Yeah, so that's also important to know. So that's not, and also medical school and all the doctors think nowadays that that fever is a cause of disease, but that's not true. It's actually your whole body, your whole physiology is reacting and overcoming. It's a natural response, and you can only activate or make your immune system more alert and ready to fight by a fever. So there is in your brainstem, a very delicate temperature center, and this center really rules and monitors all the temperature. We'll get to that because there's also a rhythm in this circadian rhythm. We'll get to that. And so we'll talk about the rhythmic life and so. But also it is important for kids that they can play with dirt and be on the beach and be with animals and so. And then they also are in contact with all kinds of bacteria, which are not dangerous, but they will help to strengthen the immune system. And
Robert, if I interrupt, let me interrupt for a sec. What is so interesting is that if you think of the word dirt, then you don't want to play into it. It's an English word used in the United States. But if you go to other countries, when they look at, and that's a student pointed out to me last week, so thank them, that they said, in Britain, they don't talk about the earth as being dirt, quote, they talk about earth or soil. And so if you play in the soil or in the earth, that doesn't have that doesn't pull out the mental image that you shouldn't be in that. But when in the US, we tend to talk about dirt, and by definition, dirt must be harmful or poisonous.
Negative, yeah, that's also true. So therefore, kids should play, let's say, with soil and with animals, and take care of rabbits or a dog or a cat and this and that. And then they are exposed also to an environment which will enhance immune function. This also want to say, often people are not aware of this. Our bodies is composed of billions of cells, living cells from the tissue, but we have about 10 times more bacteria in us. Yeah, so these bacteria, 99.999% of all bacteria, they are helpful, and they help in the digestion and in many, many things. So there are very few bacteria or viruses which could cause the more significant disease. And so don't forget, and also in my large intestine, I have at least more than 2.5 pounds of bacteria. And if we wouldn't have them, we would not survive. So you must always see that bacteria, we sort of think with bacteria and viruses, they are harmful, but they're not. Almost all of them, they are beneficial for us. And that's often what we forget, especially in the United States. Okay, so now we will talk also about some studies, and then we will show that there's a strong correlation between two things. And now what I want to explain, that you understand, when we talk about strong correlation, that means it is strongly associated. Like say smoking. Smoking and cancer is strongly associated or correlated. But it doesn't mean that each person who smokes will get cancer. And there are some people who get lung cancer who never smoked. Maybe they smoked passively as a child. That's impossible. But they didn't smoke. And also, yeah, and it is also that also when you smoke, then also it's an increase in women in breast cancer and colon cancer, both men and women, and for men more prostate cancer. So that's for sure a strong correlation. But it doesn't mean it will always happen. So that you understand also when we talk about lifestyle issues and so, that are strong correlations, but not, let's say, 100% determination. Yeah. So, and that's what I want to say with the Robert Koch postulates. Robert Koch was a giant in the 19th century, so 1880. So, and he was really the sort of the further discoverer of microbes and disease. So he studied like cholera, and then he found the pathogen that caused cholera. And then he said, well, if a pathogen causes a certain disease, then when I isolate it and introduce that to healthy people, a healthy tissue, they must get the same symptoms. And of course, that was not true. So he was puzzled that cholera or all kinds of bacteria, that they would cause disease in some or many, but not in all. Yeah. And now we know how that is. That is because of your immune system or the immune response or the host response. So we call it then the host. So that means that not if a bacteria can cause disease, also tuberculosis, and many people have been exposed to tuberculosis, but they don't get clinically disease, yeah, and then the immune system overcomes it, and a couple of months later, the tuberculosis bacteria is then gone. So therefore, you must understand that. So, but Koch in his time, he didn't know as we do now and understand the functioning of the immune system. But we come back to that, yeah. But it's then important, these four postulates, he was self-puzzled that it all didn't always work, but now we know and remember, it's the host response, and that lifestyle has a strong influence. Now, what I want to here show once is a nice study. It's also published in the Lancet, one of the leading medical journals in the world. And that is about allergies, essentially, and other disturbances in children who grow up in an anthroposophical environment, so in Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner schools. And then we'll see. So you see that when there is an increase, let's say, atopic disorder, so allergies, yeah, and also that is associated with an absence of the common childhood diseases like chickenpox or the measles or mumps, or so rubella, and so you see, but also the intestinal flora. We'll look at this. That when you have enough lactobacilli, for instance, so if you eat curd or sauerkraut or other vegetables which have been preserved by being fermented with lactobacilli, then you have a much healthier gut flora, so large intestine, and then you can't have the overgrowth of a fungus or so, like candida, because people eat a lot of sugar and have poor nutrition. They have an overload of candida, and a fungus in their gut, and that is a burden for the immune system. Okay, so we'll look at the study where children from almost 300 children from a Waldorf school, Rudolf Steiner school, were compared with 350 children of the same age and from neighboring parts of the city, and so they had the same social economic background. Yeah. So next up, and then so what was done also, what is a skin prick test? That is a very common test where you have usually 6 antigens on a very fine needle, and you press that very superficially upon the skin, and then you can see if people have a reaction to that. Yeah, and so if they have allergic reactions to that. Or a hypersensitivity reaction to that. And so also it was asked how many children got vaccinations against childhood diseases and also had fever events. So the strong tendency was that regular parents, so to speak, they would jump at any fever of a child with usually Tylenol or paracetamol, that's called in Europe, and to suppress fever. And then, of course, the child looks a little bit better, but we'll see you do the child a disservice because and also a child and a baby in the first 12 months of its life, it has on the average 9 viral infections, so dripping nose, earache, so and so, and that is necessary. Your immune system must do aerobics, yeah, but with innocent passages, so to speak. Yeah. And now then you see that 61% of the school kids they had measles, and also I was in a Waldorf school, a school doctor, and but now I'm talking in the 70s and the 80s. And then when a child had the measles, we would throw a party at his or her house so that everybody was exposed. And then there were a couple of days they got the measles, and yeah, and then and you can see that just having through childhood diseases gives you a much stronger immune system compared to being vaccinated. Yeah? And I'm not against vaccination. Yeah, you must only see, don't we sometimes overdo it with vaccination? Or maybe when there are questions, we talk about that. Good. So that was what was the outcome of that? It was highly significant that children with coming at Waldorf schools where the parents would not jump with Tylenol right away, and so that they had a much better overall health and much less atopy, much less allergies, whether it was food allergies or hay fever or eczemas or just name it. Yeah. So, and also was a strong difference that children from the Waldorf schools, they had, or the Steiner schools, they had 9 really fevers. That child had to be in bed or sick, had to be taken care of a little bit, and so on. Yeah. So therefore, one of the conclusions also in this article, and the Lancet even added an editorial to it, how impressive that was, that children, if they grew up, let's say, with this anthroposophical background, lifestyle, yeah, that they had much less allergies, yeah. And looks like there's no studies going on, but over like 50 years going on, observational studies, with control groups, also with malignancies, because they will see cancer is highly associated with poor functioning of the immune system. Yeah, and so we'll see that. So therefore, yeah, so the conclusion. And that's from another study at Jackson State University, and they also looked at children who were vaccinated and got all the series of vaccinations, and compared to with children who were not vaccinated or only had very few vaccinations. And then you see that many of these disturbances, including attention deficit and of autism, but also just the allergies, right? So food allergies, gluten intolerance, and lactose intolerance, and that was significant higher. And that is also well published, and there are more studies showing similar results. So therefore, it's always about lifestyle. So therefore, you could say, of course, questions there are that it is that you could say that there's also maybe more differences between parents who decide not to give Tylenol, but sit it through, watch carefully. But if a child has a couple of days of fever, that's fine. And then I know also, maybe you know also, little kids, when they're 4, 5, 6 years old and they have a birthday party, they get so excited that they get a fever because they have a birthday party. Yeah. So therefore, although when you're an adult and you get fever, that is now maybe more exceptional. But children quickly respond with a fever because they're still building up their immune system. Yeah. So therefore, it's also important that you must see they have this associations. You have people with a certain lifestyle, and you can compare them with a different lifestyle and see how do they differently. Yeah? And then, but overall, we can say that after all these studies and also cross-sectional studies and cohort studies, that certain things you shouldn't do, like smoking or drinking or this or that, or being on antidepressants or sleeping tablets or from your doctor, that is not good for you. Yeah? So now, and then also this is also interesting, that is iatrogenic. That means caused by the doctor, and the definition is of iatrogenic death or disease is that the doctor makes mistakes or failures, but which were preventative. Yeah. So, okay, if somebody is on a major brain operation and dies, that is not because the doctor could not have prevented it, but often doctors don't know. So in the United States, also in Europe, the third leading cause of death is iatrogenic, so preventable mistakes of the doctors. Yeah. So the United States, about between 250 to 400,000 people die because of mistakes of doctors. Yeah. So you should also be aware of that. So that it is, it's not always healthy to go to a doctor, so to speak. Okay, and then especially Tylenol, so acetaminophen, that is Tylenol in the United States. That is also that suppresses fever. You feel better, but you have many also long-term after effects, which will then also show an increased risk for asthma and eczemas. But often also that people need them, children, and when they grow up, need lifelong medication for that. Yeah. So therefore, you also hear the really data, and you see a significant difference between them lifestyles. And of course, lifestyle, somebody can do a little bit more like this. In Holland, we eat a little bit more cheese. So, but still the life expectancy is one of the highest in the world. So you must say there's more to it than just eating cheese, so to speak. So it's lifestyle. That is important. We'll talk more about lifestyles. And also like to say, if I always eat healthy and so, and I go one day to McDonald's, it won't kill me. On the other hand, when I always go to McDonald's and eat one day healthy, that wouldn't make any difference either. Yeah? Okay. So, and now here, maybe Eric can say something also about this, because of the study you like to refer to.
Sure, I think the major part is, I think one of the impressive parts I learned from Robert, in a sense, was the sense that fever isn't always bad. Unless it goes to be 104, then be sure you really take care of it. But most of the time, fever is a process which is activating the immune system. And it's so interesting that if you look at the more recent literature, and these studies have been repeated, that if you in fact look at patients who go to the hospital, and this is an interesting part even today, that when you have older people who are now compared, so the older patient comes in with a kind of pneumonia or so, they have, you want to pick them up so they're similar. So you select those who have a similar presentation and have fever at the same time, and then you separate them into two groups randomly. One where they get the normal traditional fever suppression therapy, and the other group gets watchful waiting therapy that you still check their fever, you hydrate them, obviously. And, the fever doesn't get too high, you just watch them. And then that's the permissive group. What is so interesting in these groups, and they're about equal, that the death rate of the aggressive treatment group, there were 7 deaths out of 44 patients in this research study, and only 1 death in the permissive group. And this is very suggestive that fever is probably healing you. If you may have to hydrate as well, but it's an important concept to keep in mind. And we so often forget it. We so quickly want to take some medications to suppress it. Now I'll go back to Robert.
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to discuss some also about rhythm. Now, first of all, what is very important is the 24-hour rhythm, or we call that the circadian rhythm. It has to do also with the sun. Yeah. So the whole life cycles from everything in nature is related to the sun, yeah? and the day and night. And now, so when we look at healthy people, yeah, then you can see that there is a circadian rhythm. We'll soon show a graph, and it's almost like a sinus curve, where the temperature is the lowest when you measure it, core body temperature. So when you measure it rectally, that is the lowest early in the morning, also when you wake up. So depends a little bit also when you wake up. So like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, your body temperature is at its lowest. And sorry, I put it here in Celsius. I'm a little bit now out of sync with Fahrenheit, but it's very and then the late afternoon, very early evening, it is at the highest, and then it slows down again during the evening, and when you go to bed, it starts to go down, and you can practically put a sinus curve through it. Yeah. And now, when we looked at we have treated thousands of cancer patients. Now, we have, especially in the beginning, we asked many of them who were able to do so, were not too sick that they could even take their own temperature. We asked them to make a logbook and measure at least twice a day, so in the morning and in the evening, their core body temperature, and to put it in a logbook. Yeah. And that also literature later on showed that, and medical literature, that cancer patients who have actively cancer, but also people who are at risk for cancer, they have a lower core body temperature. So it can be some up till about almost a degree lower in the morning. And that's important, they don't have really a circadian rhythm anymore. And that is also, and also Eric with his biofeedback knows a lot about that, that healthy body, healthy tissue, and health is also related to rhythm and rhythm variability. Yeah, but we'll get at some point to that. But so we looked at all our cancer patients who met if they had circadian rhythm, and actually practically nobody had a normal, regular circadian rhythm. They were always lower, and they had more like almost like stiff. They hardly had this variation. Yes, please. Next one.
Robert, can I'll make a comment, because the sense of rhythm is critical. And what the data suggests even today, for when people get vaccinated with COVID at the moment, there is suggestions that those who get the vaccine in the morning, so when the system is rising, going up, getting more activated, for them, the body produces significantly more antibodies to the vaccine than for those who get it in the afternoon. Also, if you did exercise before getting the vaccination, you also give a better response. And most people, when you exercise, you get warm inside. Whether that is the cause or whether the temperature change inside activates other processes isn't clear.
Yeah, but it is very important, because you look in evolution, also evolutionary evolution. You see that the higher you come, the more complex and the more adaptive animals are, and especially mammals, that they can always react with fever. But the human being best, yeah, we can react very rapidly with fever. And a dog or a horse, they also can make fever, but it is less part of the defense mechanism, but it's coming, you see. But we are sort of the best in also augmenting core body temperature if there's a danger, yeah? Also a trauma, not just a bacteria, but also a trauma. Yeah? So like a broken foot, or even if the skin is intact, so there's no infection, you still get, in order to start repairing, and also your movement of stem cells, you need to have an increased core body temperature. So anyway, so what they then did is, and then we gave the patients, and that's very common in Europe. We would teach them, and then they would also get twice a week, every third day, a subcutaneous injection with a mistletoe extract, Viscum album. Yeah, and and they would get also a couple of times fever range total body hypothermia. We will talk about a little bit later. We also, what we do is, especially with cancer patients, because they cannot really make a fever anymore, we help them we teach them, or teach the organism to create fever again. And when you go through a few times of a period of fever, let's say you go 1 degree up in your core body temperature, then if you do that a few times, the body learns again. And that's what you will see when in early childhood, when you suppress fever all the time, you decondition the organism, and especially your brainstem, to augment fever. But the ones, if people are deconditioned and they can't really make fever anymore, if you bring them a few times through fever, then they learn again, they condition again how to respond with fever. Yeah. So this is a little bit more information, how the patient, how they did and so, about the age. And then we could see that also the patients had clearly a much lower core body temperature, and a stiff, what I like to say, stiff rhythm. So hardly any sinus curve to see. Yeah. And so here's then a graph. You see what is red, the top. These are healthy individuals, so a control group, where also students and so, but also you shouldn't smoke, because that already, so then you already suppress your circadian rhythm. And then you see on the bottom, the black line, or very dark blue line, that's why then this cancer patients, and they see there was hardly any increase during the day, or no increase in the day. And then after we treated them, then it's the green line, and you see that the cancer patients had maybe not perfectly back, but had a clear development of circadian rhythm again. Maybe not optimum, but, and now this is important. We tested a lot of people, a lot of patients, that those patients who already early on in the treatment had a recovery of the circadian rhythm, they always had a very good outcome, or an even complete remission. So also end-stage cancer patients, we have many of them who really were on oxygen, were hospice patients, and now running around since 10, 12, 15 years and doing well. Yeah. So therefore, the circadian rhythm is important to know, but also for patients for people who don't have cancer, but at higher risk. Yeah. And so if you think you're healthy, but you can hardly notice or document a nice circadian rhythm, then you should be worried. Yeah, and do something. So anyway, what's also interesting, as we know, when you take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories to suppress pain, and so that will also suppress fever. And the interesting thing is, if we did all our treatments to improve immune function, and with the Viscum album, the mistletoe, and so, then if people still needed some pain medication, also morphine-like substances or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, it suppressed hardly the fever. Yeah, so it's hardly suppressed the circadian rhythm. We could see a return, a recovery of the circadian rhythm. Okay. Now, so therefore we could also see, really also document that if you have recovery of the circadian rhythm, that was always a significant sign for outcome and survival, that people would do better and so on. Now, we have two forms of hypothermia, and this is a local hypothermia that is also developed by Siemens, as you know, that's sort of the German General Electrics. Here you see a patient that she had liver metastases of a colon, and they disappeared in about 3 months. What we did, we do then the local hypothermia. That's all, you hardly feel it as a patient, so no burden, doesn't hurt, but we bring straight through an affected organ, let's say the liver with several liver metastases. We bring an kind of an electromagnetic field, high frequency sound or electrical field, and that goes straight through you like an MRI scan. But there, where there are these cancer cells, they have an increased resistance. So very selectively, that we can also do it in the brain. We can exclusively increase the intracellular temperature of a cancer cell. And if that goes to 41, 42 degrees, while the surrounding cells, which are healthy, nothing happens, then this cancer cell is forced to make a lot of lactic acid. And lactic acid, as you know, is acidic, so the pH goes quickly down, and then during the treatment, a cancer cell, what we call, goes in apoptosis. It dies because of its own lactic acid production. So I will never forget one little anecdote. We had a cancer patient, came for the first time, and she had breast cancer with all over the body metastases. And she had a lot of pain, and she was in a wheelchair, but she could maybe walk 10, 15 minutes with crutches. Yeah, and she came and we treated her and so. And when she went back, she stayed in a hotel. When she went back, she forgot her crutches. She could already so much walk better without pain because of the killing of many of these cancer cells. Now here, the total body hypothermia, then we have like a bed. And here you see the famous Professor Pepper. We also went through a hypothermia fever range, total body hypothermia treatment. So that we increase the core body temperature, so we bring about fever with infrared light. And then the infrared, the energy is taken up by the blood in the skin, and the blood works like the water in a central heating system. Then the blood takes up the warmth, it's warmed up in the skin, and then because of blood circulation, it goes through the whole body. But after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, then we have an increase of the core body temperature of about 1.5 to 2 degrees. Then we stop, and then we hear in the right side, the patient is sort of covered up for a little while, and then to maintain the fever, and then we slowly cool somebody off. And we do this specifically also before we apply dendritic cells. So now, this is very important to know. If you think you're sitting there and attending this lecture and you're fine and healthy and you don't drink and you don't smoke, but a healthy person makes approximately 100,000 cancer cells per 24 hours per day. Yeah, they occur through mutations, through toxic influences, also 4 and 5G. That's already now shown that it is also not good for you to be continuously bombarded with irregular electromagnetic waves. But we make about 200,000 cancer cells per day. So we can say subclinically, we all have cancer. Yeah. And you can still turn 100 if your immune system is able to early on recognize these cancer cells and then kill them. Yeah, we talk a little bit about that. But so the immune system is therefore very important also in recognizing and then killing off any cell which is abnormal, especially cancer cells. So we have all kinds of reasons, also chronic infections. When you get an acute infection, like flu, you have the influenza, you have a fever of a couple of days, that's good for you. Yeah, and then you overcome your viral infection, you had a fever, and your immune system had its gym. Yeah, but it's the chronic inflammation. So hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HPV, just name it. And we have chronic viral infections. These also, we know exactly also with COX-2 enzyme system that they cause then malignancies. Okay, and there are many other reasons. Now, and this is the other important thing. Bacteria, viruses, and parasites, they always come from outside. They come and they enter my body. And therefore, and then you make antibodies. So antibody production is to neutralize a virus, a bacteria, whatsoever. But you can, there's a whole other danger which comes from inside, and that is cancer. And you can never get cancer from your neighbor. It's impossible. Yeah, a viral infection, yes, or so, but not cancer. That always these cancer cells come from inside, so they are autologous, and therefore, especially only in higher animals, but actually a little bit in birds, but mainly in mammals, and the best in humans. We have the cellular immune system, the whole other leg, so to speak, on which the immune system works. And that is specifically there to recognize and neutralize danger which comes from inside, like cancer. Yeah, next one. So, and now what we for instance do, that we can make new dendritic cells. So, okay, because dendritic cells are, I would like to say, policemen. They crawl actively through all your inner organs, also your brain, your prostate, your breast, your colon, just name it, except your teeth. So this is essentially that. But they go everywhere and looking for abnormal cells. Yeah. And if they have found an abnormal cell, then they quickly go to the closest lymph node, which you can compare like a military base, and then they are loaded, if you're healthy, with killer cells, natural killer cells, NK cells, and you can compare them in this image like well-trained Marines, and they are ready to fight.
Robert, let me ask you a question in a sense, because I look also at the clock, and I would like to maybe have talk for 5 more minutes and open it for questions or so. And that is, I think the critical question is, I think for everybody, at least for me, is we are potentially facing future COVIDs, either variants or others. So from all your work, what are the things we can do today to empower our immune system as much as possible? And I noticed the next slide you had was this one, for example.
Yeah, okay. This is, for instance, that's also known in any flu, any infection, what is vitamin D supplementation, especially when you live in countries or half of the year, like in Northern Europe, there's hardly sunlight. The vitamin D is mainly manufactured, so to speak, in the skin under the influence of ultraviolet light, so sunlight. And now that is really, I think, a very good study. I recommend you that. We'll put also the reference, just for Germany, it's a country with about 80 million people, that if people, especially elderly people above 50, would take just a vitamin D supplementation, there would be 30,000 cancer deaths per year less. Yeah, so it will be a tremendous improvement also of quality of life, also so economic improvement and so. If people would take 1 tablet of vitamin D per day, especially in the winter time when there's very little sun. But also it is not only cancer, but also shown in almost any viral infection, but also bacterial infection, that vitamin D is important. Also, let's say tuberculosis. Now there's much less an issue nowadays, but in the 19th century, all the people had tuberculosis. Where did they go? They get to Switzerland, in Davos and St. Moritz, and they would be in sanatoria, and they would put in the sunlight for several hours a day, and that often works. And why? Because of vitamin D. Then the skin made a lot of vitamin D, and that was a major factor in overcoming tuberculosis infections, especially lung, but also in organs. So therefore, it's important to also say, and that is also your nutrition and lifestyle. There are many parts which are important to do and to think. And what is now more simple than or to say, I've forced myself in the winter to sit half an hour in the sunlight, or just if you have your arms or your face, that's usually enough for half an hour. Yeah, but if there is no sun, like in Northern Europe or in Canada, then you must do supplementation. So I think supplementation of vitamin B is also useful, but specifically for vitamin D, and that should be part of your lifestyle. That targeted supplementation.
So, Robert, what I hear is the following: one is to be sure you have a high enough vitamin D. That's about 5,000 units or so a day. That's one.
I would say 1,000 units. Okay, that's okay.
1,000 units. Two, live a regular lifestyle by which you can slowly support your biological rhythms. Three, really, as much as possible within reason, when you have a mild fever, do watchful waiting, I would call that. Check it very carefully, especially with children. You don't want to go to 104, but basically do watchful waiting and trust that when it's a benign illness overall, nature is the best healer, and support that process. 4, if you have little kids, have them play in healthy dirt outside.
Soil.
Great, much better, soil or earth. So they are inoculated in a way with all these benign organisms. So kids eating soil is not bad usually, but don't do it where there's a lot of pollutants or people have used all kinds of pesticides, etc. That's totally different. Is there any other specific thing, when I think of COVID-19 or getting to protect your or to strengthen your immune system against viruses, in a sense, any other items that we can do?
Yeah, well, the thing is also how we didn't talk about it, you're mentally functioning. And of course, now everybody lives in fear for something. If you really look at the data, especially younger, then there is no reason for fear. That probably that when you are 25 and a student at San Francisco State University, the chances that on your way home you get killed by a car is much higher than to get COVID-19 and die from it. Yeah? So therefore you must also see in relation, but fear and depression, things like this, are never good for your immune system. And if you have once fear and lion in the zoo or so, then it's okay. But it is always chronic. Like lifestyle, you can have positive chronic events and negative chronic events. And therefore, stress, depression, also fear, these are things which will also give immune suppression. We can also show that even biochemically with stress hormones. You create more stress hormones when you're under stress. That's why they're called that way.
Robert, you have given, Robert, in many ways, these practices are great. And you have also given a remarkable practice in the past called a retrospective meditation at night as a way to slowly look back on yourself, to identify a stressor almost backwards so you can see how it gets triggered and you develop a witness on yourself. Would you be willing to share the practice that people can do?
Yeah, I would highly recommend this. I do it myself too, essentially since 1983, consequently, 1981. But that you, at the end of the day, maybe you brush your teeth, and then before you jump in bed, you sit down on a chair, preferably with a straight back, and then you remember your day, the events. But now it comes backwards. You go, sit down, you brush your teeth, and then you go back in time till the moment you woke up. That is very important. And if you do that for a little while, you are much more alert and different. You're much more aware of yourself, but also of your environment and the interaction. Yeah. And because normally during the day we are like in a rat race, like this mill, like animal rodents. They keep running and running in the mill, And that's also how we do essentially. Yeah? And now if I sit down and I remember my day, yeah, then I unwind, so to speak. Yeah, but it also makes me more awake while I'm running forward during the day. And I would highly recommend it. And it has for sure also very positive effects. Essentially, also emotionally and spiritually, but also in your in your health. This should become part of your lifestyle. 10 minutes doesn't have to be an hour. There's 10 minutes so that you do retrospection in a late evening.
Robert, I want to thank you so much, but I also realized there were some questions, and there was at least one question in the chat. And the question says, I like your opinion about being vaccinated against COVID-19. What do you, if you find that useful? What would you recommend?
Well, that's because it's a very a controversial issue because let me briefly say something. Like, I'm also an epidemiologist and an immunologist, and I know that it was always so, it is so, that in order to study and to document also side effects and efficacy, you have to follow 44,000 people over at least 4 years in order to have a good idea about possible short-term and long-term toxicity side effects, and also about the efficacy. Yeah? And now we look at the COVID-19 vaccines. They were developed used in September. Yeah, so and then started to be used 2-3 months later. And what is the worrisome part for me as a scientist is that the data which have been presented have never been peer-reviewed. Just these companies that make these claims, it's a press release. Yeah, but nobody looked into what it is. So normally when you publish something in a good journal, it's always peer-reviewed. So some independent researchers with a lot of knowledge in that field, they look at the data and they say, yeah, or hey, this is a weak spot or whatever. Yeah, that's peer-reviewed. But all the data are not peer-reviewed. Yeah? And then the second thing is what is new, that up till now, if a vaccine was developed, it was done before a bacteria or a virus, which was or killed or severely damaged, so that it could not really cause an infection. But these all these COVID-19 vaccine are messages, mRNA vaccines, and they have never been tested in humans before. And there's also and that was a concern, let's put it this way. So I'm not against vaccination, but I think there should be more, also to doctors who then vaccinate, more information, more objective information, what it really does, and there are additives to this. So it is not an easy, so yeah, I'm for it or against it, I would say I'm concerned.
Yes, I think what you're really saying is we need to do long-term monitoring of the people. And that is not yet always in the United States, not in place. I do know that Pfizer is doing it as an in-house company because they took, in exchange for Israel being inoculated very early, they made an agreement to get all the medical records of all the patients. And so there is a follow-up on that. We'll see what happens, but I think what Robert points out is you would like the data to really be in public media so we can, in scientific journals, to know. So we, in some sense, we're all part of a small experiment that you don't totally know. At the moment, to be honest, it looks like that the people who do get vaccinated, at least it reduces the risk of serious disease and death in those populations at the moment. Robert,
okay.
I want to just thank you so much. This is an applause for all of you.
Thank you for thanking.
And now let me just shift the slides one more time for a moment, if I can do this. I have one more announcement, so really thank you so much. If people want to know more about it, let me put this back on my slideshow. That should be here. They can contact you at r.gorter7@gmail.com, or in future semesters, come to San Francisco State, learn, take the class Holistic Health 650 Anthroposophical Medicine. I would say that. And finally, I want to thank all of you who participated for coming. And I want to announce that next week, 2 weeks from now, we have a remarkable international clinician with massive experience with trauma. And she'll look at the emotional side of what we can do and how we can balance compassion for self with others in these changing times. It's Eleanor Pardes, a clinical psychologist from Tel Aviv University, who will be here at 12 o'clock on March 19th. And finally, if you have questions, please attend our class at the Institute for Holistic Health, enroll our holistic health classes, or give us a contact. And I thank each of you for participating.
Yeah, people can write me and I will answer.